Hello, it is me, AbstractMite, and we are back for another tower building tutorial. This one's gonna be quite basic, but it does have a very important basis that I need to get to people when they're starting tower building. Today, we'll be looking at all types of Z-fighting and misalignment. These examples are primary examples of how people misalign or create Z-fighting. Let's get started. What is Z-fighting? For people who do not know what Z-fighting is when two blocks of the exact same size covering the same space. So right here, you'll see this little area in between these blocks. Well, that was Z-fight because it can't render. It will just randomly render one part, and so they just start overlapping. You don't want that. Today, we'll be showing you how to fix that. So, in order to fix Z-fighting, we will take one of the blocks and slightly misalign it or shrink it. 0.995 is the lowest difference you can do that does not create Z-fighting at a long distance. For example, if I put this at 0.999 and zoom out, oh, there we go. If you go too far away, you can see it Z-fight from a distance, but when you're up close, it doesn't. So that's why we use 0.995. A primary example of Z-fighting is usually found on Archimedes blocks. Archimedes is a plugin that lets you rotate objects in an arc, which can make you create circles and whatnot. We'll use that in a later episode and teach you how to use it. But for now, you're going to need to understand that people need to know that there's Z-fighting when you're using Archimedes. In order to fix that, you're going to have to go to each and every other block that doesn't overlap and change their sizes. What you're going to do is go to the axis that it's on that's Z-fighting. In this case, it's the y-axis, and change the size. For me, I'm changing it to 0.995. Now, these don't Z-fight. You'll see a tiny crease on these, but this doesn't matter. People don't care because they know that you're trying to fix Z-fighting. This is also a type of Z-fighting. It's hard to see without color, so I'll color in a second to show you. But if you look closely, the plastic Z-fights, you can see like flicker. And if you put it in color, you can especially see it. Don't do this. If there's gonna be a part and you need it to be close to another part, just do this. Now it will never Z-fight because if I put it as a different color now, they don't Z-fight. This is hard to spot sometimes, but people can either find out on low graphics, which usually shows you different shading, or you will find it randomly and it will have stud texture that looks slightly off. Try to avoid this as it looks quite ugly and is not something that people like to see in JToH towers. Next up, we have the ultimate instance of Z-fighting. This is a structure that someone tried to create. Unfortunately, there's a bunch of errors in here that create Z-fighting on every single block. And let me tell you, it does not look very nice when you see 3 stud textures overlapping with each other. So let's go ahead and fix it. We are going to click on it, go to the Properties tab, and change the size to 0.995, because this is the axis it's Z-fighting on, which is the x-axis. We've now solved one of the instances, but if you quickly look, the other one Z-fights. But since there's another block already shrunken, we're going to have to go ahead and shrink this one a different way. Instead of 0.995, we're going to change this to 0.99 so it doesn't overlap with another one. Now, the structure is fixed. Now, of course, you can rearrange which one is 0.99 and which one's 0.995, depending on how you want it to be, because this looks kind of odd. I'm not too much of a fan of this, obviously. For example, I can change it, so instead of shrinking it, we're gonna grow it a little bit, and now it looks slightly better. The point is that you need to make sure that these do not Z-fight, and you need to also make sure people don't wall hop on it. So you have to just go out of your way to configure it in a way that doesn't look like it's wall hoppable. Next up are misalignments. Misalignments are when blocks are slightly moved a little bit or shrunken a little bit, so it doesn't use the 1x1 stud texture completely, and it will randomly cut off. This is ugly, and also I don't know why you would not be using one stud synaptic grid, because that's the basic synaptic grid you use when you're building. So let's get into it on how you can solve them. These right here are slightly moved up. In order to fix it, you could always just drag it against the part, drag it against the floor, or just drag it. But make sure it doesn't Z-fight. So you might have to go out of your way and change it to look like this, so it does not Z-fight. See, this does not Z-fight, nor is it misaligned. Next is a case of bad synaptic grid. In order to fix this, we can go to its size, and if it's not a full number like 3 or 6 instead of 2.198, go ahead and change it to a flat number like 3. As you see, as soon as you do that, the studs are back. They look normal. And I think that's good because most people like to see non-cut-off studs. Next, we have another malformed block. Similar to the last one, this can be easily changed by changing the last thing to a whole number, and now it's a line. Now, for some reason, if you misline it very poorly, let's say, for example, like this, and it's misaligned like that, and you need to change it, you might have to realign it with a 1-stud snap to grid after so it sticks to the ground correctly, so it's not misaligned with the ground. Sometimes this may happen, but it's not always guaranteed. But make sure to be careful, because if you don't, it might end up being misaligned on the floor instead of just being misaligned on the top. Another example of misalignment is this. If you look closely, there is a random crease. This could be due to you not having the right size. For example, this one's 0.995 and this one's 3. Or this is because you might have somehow put a gap in the middle on accident by a low snap to grid number. What you can do is either fix this by putting this as the size of 3. 3 if we're trying this again. Or you could go ahead and just snap it like that. Don't do that usually though, because it looks ugly and it will add up eventually. Go ahead and just make sure you use solid snap to grid numbers that are whole numbers. This right here is also misaligned. It looks ugly, and a nicer way to do this is if you're trying to make a curved object, just put a gap here. People won't care that there is a gap here. They know it's gonna just be there so they don't have Z-fighting. It's not a big deal, but if you want to make sure your blocks look nice, you might want to do that. Later on, we'll find out how to fill these kind of gaps later, but now is not the tutorial for that. Next up is another misaligned block. This block is misaligned on the Y-axis. We can tell because if we look right here, there's a gap. And there shouldn't be a gap here. So let's change it to 11. And boom. Now it seems as it's fixed. And it's not misaligned anymore. This right here is misaligned very badly. Now if we look at this, these are 1, 1, and 0.99. So we're going to either change the 0.99 to a 1, or if you don't do that, an alternative that you shouldn't really use, but you can use sometimes, is to just drag it to the block below and it'll snap. I wouldn't suggest solely using that, as I said earlier. Try to always just resize it to the correct size. Unless you can't, then just use the method I showed you then. And that's basically it for the Z-fighting and misalignment prevention tutorial. Thank you so much for watching, and we will be back in another 2 years with an Archimedes tutorial. Goodbye.